So, good evening, everyone. I'm Roger Mosey, the Master of Selwyn. You're very welcome, whether you're here in the Quarry Whitehouse Auditorium or joining us online. You're equally welcome there too. Now, this is an event that I was initially slightly hesitant to post about on social media, because is it about the event, if I was posting, or about taking part in a debate? Or would it be me signalling a personal position, doing my digital Narcissus bit, saying I'm a member of a particular tribe? So is it really about you being here tonight, or about me posting things? And as I suppose you could sum it up, is it okay to be on X? And all those issues about social media and culture wars are all things which Timandra Harkness, our guest tonight, is going to talk about. She's a broadcaster, a comedian, a current or lapsed comedian, and an author. And she has, I think, a genuinely terrific book coming out soon, which I've been enjoying very much in proof in the last week or two. So Timandra will speak in a minute. Just before we do that, we have, of course, got a long series of debates and free speech events here at Selwyn. This one tonight is in association with Living Freedom, and Alistair Donald is going to tell us in 1 minute what Living Freedom is.
Thanks, everyone, and hello. Nice to see you all. As Roger says, I work for a charity called Ideas Matter, an educational charity, and I run an initiative called Living Freedom. It's set up 7 years ago as a summer school. It's been recently turned into a series of events in universities. In fact, this is the third event in a tour that's going around the UK just now that's going to take in 10 universities, each with the same idea that we choose an interesting subject, sometimes controversial, and we try to discuss it in a civilized fashion. And when I saw last year that the Vice-Chancellor at Cambridge has talked about the idea of doing dialogues and free speech, then I thought it was something that really met with the ideals that we have at Living Freedom. So I hope this is going to be a good discussion, and we look forward to hearing your comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, thank you for coming in person, and hello online. I am Timandra Harkness, writer, sometimes broadcaster, lapsed comedian. And as Roger said, I have a book coming out, which I will show you the cover of at the end. It comes out in May. This is the first time I've really talked about what's in the book, so it's very exciting for me. I will try and be brief, because I am condensing 100,000 words into hopefully 20 minutes. I'll do my best. And I'm afraid, just going to pre-apologise. I'm not actually explicitly going to talk about misinformation in the talk, but I'm very happy if you want to discuss that afterwards. So, why do I say that social media is not the problem, given that it is blamed at the moment for almost everything? Well, I want to start by taking you back to one of the things that social media is blamed for, and is especially going to be blamed for this year, is a malign influence on politics and the way we do politics. So I'm going to take you back. Some of you in the room may be too young even to remember 2016, but I'm taking you back to this publication in 2016, where the editor said, the 2016 election cycle will be remembered for many things, but for those who work in politics, it may best be remembered as the year that political data reached maturity. Now, spoiler, for any of you that were too young to remember that, it was not best remembered as the year that political data reached maturity. It was best remembered for the year that, first of all, the UK voted to leave the EU, and then the US decided to elect Donald Trump as president. And after that, a lot of people were looking for explanations for those events and turned to social media and the internet and data to look for explanations. So you got articles like this one in The Guardian, The Dangers Less Democracy. So this is actually 2017, because they ran a lot of articles about this. There's several journalists who, to my mind, had only just discovered data and how it was used in political campaigning, because I felt very ambivalent about this sudden upsurge in interest in social media and political campaigning, because I had written my previous book, Big Data, Does Size Matter, in 2015, in which I'd said, I don't really like the way that politics is now done through data, through social media, the way it's turned into a kind of digitized campaigning. And at that point, nobody cared. Absolutely nobody responded. But after 2016, suddenly a whole lot of new people got interested in this. And you will see at the bottom of this article where I was reading it online, this article is the subject of a legal complaint on behalf of Cambridge Analytica, etc., because basically their investigations were mainly going after this company, Cambridge Analytica, which was blamed for somehow mysteriously manipulating millions of people into voting the wrong way online. So part of me was glad that other people had woken up to what I regarded as a worrying trend in politics. And the other part of me was annoyed because when I look back a little way, say to 2012, The Guardian, so the same newspaper, was running gushing articles about how wonderful it was that Barack Obama was using all this data to win his campaigns. And this particular article is a very long one, goes into a lot of detail about how Obama's campaign had used Facebook, had gone onto Facebook, got their volunteers to sign up, and by signing up had given access to not only their profiles, but all their contacts and their network of friends on Facebook. And in fact, used data campaigning in a lot of other ways, which to my mind were very questionable in terms of how they got the data and respect for people's privacy. In this whole long article, there's one paragraph that says, maybe there are some privacy issues. But basically, at this point, 2012, everybody who cared thought this was a very wonderful thing. So, is it a wonderful thing? Is it the end of democracy? Well, I'm going to very quickly go through the main things that people think of when they think of social media political campaigning. And I'm looking at this, partly at this publication. If you're interested in this kind of thing, this is the publication from which I took the quote at the beginning from Andrew Theriault. It was published in 2016, before the elections. It's basically a how-to guide, how to use data to do online political campaigning, written mainly by people who are involved in the Democratic Party use of that kind of technology, especially Andrew Theriault himself, who I interviewed for the new book, and he was really adorably frank and open about how it works, how you go about it, and what he thought of the criticisms. So the main things that we think about in terms of how we see this kind of campaigning being done online through social media are that data is gathered about each of us, we are profiled, we are targeted with particular messages, the content is tailored to who we are, or at least to who our profiles are, and then we are psychologically manipulated into voting for whoever people want us to vote for. So I'm just going to rattle through those very quickly. Data gathering. So I asked Andrew Theriault, I said, well, how many data points would you have on each voter then? Hundreds, thousands? And he said, thousands, in that kind of, obviously, thousands voice. Although he did point out that not every one of those thousands of data points would be specifically about each one of us. Some of them would be. Some of them would be like, we know your name, your age, your address. In America, voter registration is much more detailed than here, so they will know people's voting history. Some of it will be general. So from our postcode or zip code, it's very easy to surmise things about people who live there on average. So average age, average income, average family size, that kind of thing. So some of them will be general profiles that may not apply to you as an individual, but on average are more likely to than not. So there's thousands of data points. So then they build a profile of each one of us. But there's two things they really care about. Are you a persuasion target or are you a mobilization target? Are you someone who hasn't yet decided which way to vote, in which case the aim is to persuade you how to vote, or are you somebody who's going to vote in the way that they want, but they're not really sure they can rely on you to get out of bed on the day? So the point is to make sure you turn up. Now, Andrew Theriault actually gave me a brilliant example of this. He said that while I was speaking to him, the Boston primary mayoral elections were on. And as he said himself, nobody except him bothers to turn up on those. He's the only person that turns up on the day to vote for those, but he always does. So he said, I'm never a mobilization target because they have very extensive voter records in America, so everybody knows that, in his words, if I don't show up, it's because I'm in the hospital. So he's not a mobilization target. But that means that all the mayoral candidates were sending him material because he was a persuasion target. All of them, he said, except one, Brianna Wu, didn't bother to send him anything. So I said, well, why is this? What do they know about you? He says, well, I'm a signed-up supporter. I give them regular donations. So somebody there has been smart enough to go, okay, well, he's not a mobilization target because we know he's going to show up. He's not a persuasion target because he donates to our campaign. So let's save the postage and not write to him. And it obviously worked, because she then, a few months after I spoke to him, she got elected. So this is a lot of the targeting is about what do you want the person to do. Then you have demographic targeting. So in 2019, for the general election here, Facebook let you see what adverts political parties were putting out and broadly the audience they were aimed at. Only broadly. There will have been more specific targeting. So, for example, Conservatives showed this advert. We need a Conservative majority to get Brexit done, but only to men. So you're asking yourselves, what did the women see? They saw this advert. Can you spot the difference? Anybody? No, you're being very polite, Cambridge audience. Yes, it's we'll get Brexit done so that we can invest in our NHS, schools and police. And this apparently is an absolute classic division that you talk to men about the economy and foreign affairs, and you talk to women about health, education and crime. So that's a very crude targeting, actually. I mean, this is not kind of psychological magic territory. But the other thing you can do is you could show people adverts, and I hope you're all starting to go, this doesn't really seem that different from other kinds of marketing, actually. This is pretty much standard advertising. But you can show people different adverts and see which ones get the results that you want. So, for example, in the same election, these 3 adverts went out to different audiences for tests to see if they could test which one got the most response. Does anybody recognise this woman? Jo Swinson, yes, she was the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Yes, younger people in this room remember this face. Nobody else does, sadly. Which I think shows that no matter how sophisticated your digital marketing campaign, if people don't like what you're offering, they won't vote for it or buy it in some cases. So much for the targeting, the profiling, the targeting, and the testing adverts and tailoring them. What about the psychological manipulation? Is it true that Cambridge Analytica could make people vote by cunning psychological techniques? Well, so I'm going to bring right back to Cambridge, in fact. Now, 2 things I'd like to say. One is that Cambridge Analytica did not have access to a lot of the data that they claimed to have access to simply because Facebook had tightened up access to all the things that they claimed to use several years before they claimed to be able to work their electoral magic. But, you know, if you're trying to get people to pay you to do massive things in an election, you're not necessarily going to be that frank with them. And the other thing to say is that they have nothing to do with Cambridge University. They used the name. In fact, I believe that they approached the Cambridge Psychometric Centre and said, can we work with you? And Cambridge Psychometric Centre said, no. But this is the paper from which their approach and all the things they claimed originated. Private traits and attributes are predictable from digital records of human behaviour. And this is the original research by Michael Kosinski et al. Kosinski went off to Silicon Valley after this, where I'm sure he's doing very well. And what they did was they got 58,000 volunteers, so it's a good big sample, and the volunteers fulfilled an online psychological test, so they got a psychological profile from answering lots of questions, and then also gave them access to their Facebook profile so that they could see what their activity was and see what correlations there were. And some of them, this is a very well reported and cited paper, you may even remember, some of them were surprising. Apparently, if you like curly fries, like on Facebook, not just in real life, then that predicts higher intelligence. But as you all know, correlation is not causation, so you can't eat curly fries to make yourselves more intelligent. Just want to make that quite clear. So they could predict things like sex, race, broad political affiliations, lots of very broad psychological things from what people liked on Facebook, in a way that's kind of not that surprising. I mean, if you look at a stranger's profile on social media, you can quickly get a fairly good idea about them, well enough to target them for advertising, which is essentially what we're talking about. Now, if you want to try this for yourself, you can, because you can go to the Cambridge Psychometric Centre website, or at least you could, last time I checked, which was recently, you go to applyMagicSource.com, you can do the online psychological test, and you can give it access to your social media feed to see who it thinks you are. So I did this, obviously, for research. I gave it access to my Twitter feed, and it said I was a 31-year-old man, which I wasn't even then. and I'm still not. So at this point, I stopped worrying about the psychological manipulation. So don't worry about psychological manipulation is my take-home message. But I do worry about another thing. And interesting, Andrew Theriault himself said to me, he was worried about this, that we don't have a shared reality anymore. That it's not even just that we live in the same world, but we disagree about what to do about things, that increasingly we live in separate worlds. And he, interestingly, he put this further back than the internet. He put this back to the world of talk radio in the United States and cable channels and the fragmented media landscape. So to give you a little idea of what that change is, the change from the mass media world to social media world, in 1969, 500 million people simultaneously watched the first humans walking on the moon, in black and white, obviously, because it was coming from the moon. And that was 1 in 7 of all the humans alive on the planet at the time. That's an extraordinary shared media experience. And that was because it was a huge historic event, and the few people who controlled the news that comes to all of us, who controlled the very few television channels, the few radio channels, the few newspapers, people of immense power and influence, like Roger, in fact, had decided that this was a really important news event and people ought to watch it. So it came very much top down. A handful of people went, yeah, this is important, we should all watch it. And 500 million people, 1 in 7 of us, watched it at the time. Fast forward to today, over 12 billion people have watched Baby Shark. And apologies for any parents in the audience that this will have triggered, and you're now going to hear the song for the rest of the evening. So on average, every person on earth has watched it more than once, basically. And I suspect this means that some people have watched it a great deal more than once, many, many times. But that's not because a handful of news editors decided that Baby Shark is really important cultural content and we should all see it. It's because, yes, there was a very clever marketing department that said we're going to get this out here, we will pay for placement, we'll pay for advertising, but then they judged it really well. People shared it. There's now a horizontal media environment, so individuals shared it and passed it on. So it's one annoying song about sharks, 12 billion tiny steps for a thumb. Doesn't really work, does it? But it's a completely different media landscape, because instead of a few people deciding what everyone should get, things have to be passed around. So each of us now has our own individual channel, which is curated or edited, if you like, partly by putting money in, so advertising and placement and so on, partly by us choosing what we want to look at, partly by the people that we know or the people we follow or our contacts, our wider networks, deciding what they want to share with us for whatever reason, and partly, of course, by the algorithms deciding what we might want to see next. And this is where, of course, there's the pretense that what we get is filtered especially for us. So because my Twitter feed makes me look like a 31-year-old man, apparently, Twitter does actually think that I'm a man, which means I get some really interesting advert choices. And the one I was most charmed by, in the sense that it completely sums up everything I'm talking about, is this one. Imagine a shop that only sells clothes suited to you. Well, now you don't have to. This is the promise of the personalised world. No more looking through racks of clothes that you don't want, that are never going to suit you. No, only the things that you are going to want are going to come to you. So it's the idea that the universe is filtered for your benefit. But of course, what really happens is we are filtered for the benefit of others. We are filtered for the people that want to sell certain kinds of clothes. Go, all right, well, what I'm aiming at is men of these ages, possibly in these areas, possibly with this kind of taste, possibly with this kind of income. Advertising sellers, who have you got that fits that? Okay, I'm going to offer you this much to show my advert to them. So it's the filters go the other way around. Okay, I'm going to have to speed up now. So does this mean that we all live in a filter bubble? Is this why exchange and social media can get so irate, that I only see things that I'm going to agree with, you only see things you're going to agree with, everything gets very angry? Well, a guy called Chris Bale at Duke University thought this might be the case, and he especially thought it when he woke up in 2016 and was really surprised that millions of his fellow citizens had elected Trump, and he thought, I must have been in a filter bubble. This must explain why I had no idea this was going to happen. So he did some research, because he runs a thing called the Polarization Lab, and he found a couple of really interesting things. One of them was false polarization. So he found that, in fact, people's views are not as far apart as they perceive, that most people think that the people on the other side from them have more extreme views than they actually do, and feel more hostile towards them than they actually do. So everybody goes around thinking that the other side is more extreme and feels really hostile, whereas in actual fact, and this is perhaps why offline exchanges tend to be more friendly, if you actually talk to people, you find that most of us are less extreme and have more in common and don't actually hate each other as much as we perceive the other person to. But the other thing he found was that he experimented with trying to get people out of a filter bubble. He said, well, let's get people talking to each other then, get them out of their filter bubble, and they realise that they have more in common. So he deliberately got people online who'd signed up as volunteers, and he connected them with people that he knew they disagreed with, and they didn't start agreeing with each other. They dug in much more to their own existing opinions. So he thought, well, okay, well, the filter bubble idea is obviously wrong then. So what is going on? And what he concluded was that what we go on social media to do is not, in fact, to receive and exchange ideas and possibly have our minds change. We, in fact, go on social media to build our identities, because that's where so much social life happens now, and because our identities are more and more important to us. And social media is perfect for this, because you can choose what you put out. You can choose how the side of yourself to portray to others, and then you can show people who you are. And this is why when you post opinions on social media, you're probably not saying, I've spent a long time thinking about this. Now, would people like to point out to me where I'm wrong? As, you know, hopefully you might if you were a student in a seminar. No, you go there to say, I have these opinions because they show which tribe I belong to and what my identity is. And if you attack them, you're attacking who I am, and I don't feel like me anymore. And I feel that you're attacking all these people who are my friends and share my identity, and I'm going to get really angry. So this is what Chris Bale was faced with. So he, as he says, we're addicted to social media because it helps us do something we as humans are hardwired to do, present different versions of ourselves, observe what other people think of them, and revise our identities accordingly. And then I found this post on Instagram, which again I thought summed this up beautifully. I'm the most myself when I know you're watching. And for an extra twist, as some of you may know, this influencer, who has many, many followers, Lil Michaela, doesn't actually exist in the real world at all. She is CGI. She is made by a branding agency. Not only that, she went through an existential crisis where she discovered that she in fact wasn't real and had been created by an advertising agency, and went, oh, well, I don't know who I am now because everything I thought I knew about me, that I'm 19, a woman, a mixed race, and all this has been chosen and invented by the marketing agency to help them market things. So who am I really? I don't even know. And all her followers, like million followers, instead of going, oh, okay, the joke's over, that's fine, they responded with great sympathy going, that's awful. How could they do that to you? How could they deceive you that way? That's terrible. Oh, you know, it's like, you must be feeling really bad. We're here for you. And I thought it's so interesting because there's obviously something there that we identify with. We identify with the sense that, well, maybe none of us are really real. Maybe all of us are only what we post on social media. And maybe if you scratch the surface, maybe none of us are really sure who we are. So I'm in the middle of thinking about this, and I go to the Museum of You, the Museum. This one's in Amsterdam. I think this one's closed. It's a pop-up, and others have opened. It's actually, I thought, how narcissistic is this? But of course I got there and I was the only weird person going on my own. Most people went as a social thing with like family or friends or on a date. And then the whole idea of it is that you create social media content, you do selfies or TikTok videos, and you share them with your family and friends. And, you know, so it is actually incredibly sociable in the new social media way. It's also very self-aware. You can drive a forklift truck to move your likes around a warehouse. And then you can drown in a sea of likes, and then you get reborn into a hall of mirrors, which I found surprisingly moving. also metaphorically. But it was a very disorientating experience. So suddenly I'm on my own. I'm in this room, no idea how big it is, can't really orient myself, no connection with the outside world. I'm the only person there. It's just me and my reflection multiple times. If anyone's ever seen the film noir Lady from Shanghai, no, just me. It's the end of that anyway. It's a good film. Go and look it up. And I realised that I was having exactly the feeling of if you only lived inside social media, where you're not really connected with the outside world, you only have the reflection of yourself. It's kind of terrifying and vertiginous, but also kind of exhilarating and freeing. And just to really rub this in, the same weekend I was rereading this excellent book, which I recommend to all of you, The Culture of Narcissism, in which Christopher Lasch says that we're all basically narcissists now. So the narcissist depends on others to validate his self-esteem, because for the narcissist, the world is a mirror, whereas the rugged individualist saw it as an empty wilderness to be shaped to his design. So we're not individualist in the sense that we don't need anybody else and we're really self-sufficient and we can just go out and do what we like. It's the opposite to that. We're individual because we're not sure who we are, and so we do, in fact, constantly need feedback from the world to tell us who we are. And, of course, social media is perfect for that. I mean, you compare this to the original Narcissus in the Great Myth. I mean, he looked at himself in the reflection of a pond, and he was lucky enough to be young and beautiful because he didn't have any filters on his pond. But he became so obsessed with his own reflection, he ignored Echo, who was an actual, well, not a human, in fact, a nymph. But anyway, Echo was an actual person who was in love with him, so he could have an actual relationship with another person. But no, he was too busy looking at his own reflection. But now we have our mobile phones. It's not, you can filter what your reflection looks like, and then you can see how many people have liked it and share it. I mean, it's way better than what a narcissus had. It's no wonder we're so addicted to our phones, if addiction is the right word, which obviously it isn't, but you know what I mean. Just to digress, even though I'm running over time, I was on a train. When I first started thinking about this, I was on a train. Someone had dropped their shopping. 2 tomatoes had fallen on the floor and decided to reenact, oh no, I've gone backwards. They decided to reenact the myth of Echo and Narcissus. Isn't that uncanny? I swear I didn't set dress that. That was just as I found it. So I fear I've brought us to a rather depressing place where we're in fact all hooked on social media, not even because it's social, because, I mean, let's be frank here. Some of it is great because we are just basically really social beings and we can stay in touch with our friends and family and people we've vaguely only met once through social media, and that is a really positive thing. But the sticky thing, I think the thing that keeps us going back, is this sense that we're not really sure who we are, and we can get constant feedback, constant reassurance that we are seen and known and recognised. And this leads us to the rather depressing possibility that we are, in fact, little rats in Skinner boxes, clicking away on our phones for rewards, the way the rats would click away on the lever to get food pellets. But this was my, sadly now deceased, pet rat, Socrates. In spite of the name, he was not wise at all. He chewed through his own hammock while lying in it, landing with a bang on the floor of his cage. 3 times. Did that 3 times, right? So all of you in this room certainly have found your way in through the door and sat on a seat without mishap. All of you online have actually managed to plug in and watch something online. So I think we can all agree that you're all much smarter than Socrates the rat. So I don't think we should worry about ourselves being rats in Skinner boxes, addicted to social media, doing whatever the psychologically manipulative designers of the algorithms want us to do. The problem is both better and worse than that. I think the problem is not the technology, the problem is us. Because we don't have the shrinking sense of who we are because of the technology. We have the technology that we have, where everything is supposedly personalised and constantly feeding back to us how great we are, how special we are, how individual we are, because of our shrinking sense of who we are. So there's better in the sense that it means we can still go on using technology and become full operational humans in the world. But it's worse in another sense because I think it's a much wider, deeper problem in society, the problem that we're not sure who we are, And that's why we have to keep trying to build our identities in a way that gets constant feedback from others. And we're stuck in Christopher Lash's Hall of Mirrors, where it's not about us shaping the world to our desires, like the old rugged individualist he talks about, but it is about us stuck looking in the mirror, looking inwards, constantly worried about how others see us. So the challenge, I think, that faces us is rescuing the person from the personalising technology and from the personalised world we live in. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Roger, and we'll hopefully have a good old argument about some things.
So we will, as ever, bring in the audience here in a moment or two for questions. And if you're watching online, I was wondering about what that noise was originally. master@sel.cam.ac.uk. So just drop me an email to master@sel.cam.ac.uk, and I will read out any online questions that come in. Timandra, when I was reading your book, the alarming things about technology, which I sort of knew, but when you presented them in this way, there's a rather striking thing when you say that originally we thought digital technology was going to be our servant. And you say, but now it's a bit like Wolf Hall, in which the servants are around you, but you're not sure who they're working for or how loyal they're going to be. And there's some quite alarming stuff. So, if I type on the iPad now, tech companies will know it's me because of my pattern of inputting text. So there is a serious infringement of our privacy and our data happening all the time.
Yes, that's right. And I was a little torn when I decided to frame the book as technology not being the problem, because I think there are a lot of problems with it. And the infringement of privacy, I certainly take very seriously. The point about Wolf Hall was that people, when the AI assistants especially and things, and the smart speakers where you can just go, play me this or find me this or tell me the weather. The idea is it's going to be like digital Athens, and that we would be freed up for the higher things in life. We do philosophy and politics and so on, and the machines will do it all for us. And in one way that's true, of course. There's a lot of very time-saving, labour-saving technology there. But the Wolf Hall point was that, again, like the way that things are filtered, apparently for us, but in fact it's us being filtered for them, that when you ask your smart speaker for all these things, the data about what you're asking for, and even about other things that are happening in your house, maybe the sounds you're making, maybe who else is in the house, maybe whether you've got a cough, is all being fed back to another company so that they can then do whatever they want to do with the information. Maybe they want to sell you something, maybe they want to profile you and sell the profile to a political party for the next election. And I do think we should worry about that. I do think we should take it seriously. But I think there's a parallel danger, which is that if we fixate on the dangers of the technology and think, oh no, we are helpless in the hands of these tech companies and their products, then we make ourselves more helpless than we actually are. It's like we willingly give up our subjectivity because we say, oh, well, but what can we do? The technology is controlling everything. It's too late.
Is it partly about education? Because, everyone's familiar with the thing where you go and look online for, an air fryer or something, and then you get air fryer ads for next week. But there's a whole lot more than that going on. But that's what people don't know about. So they are not as aware of the fact they're getting only one side of a political argument on, one social media platform. They're not as aware about where personalisation is happening. Our Vice Master here works on, gambling issues. If you have a propensity to gamble, you are probably being served more gambling ads. There are things which are actually really seriously dangerous in this.
Well, that's a really interesting example, actually, because yes, that is one thing that happens, is that you may be served more things which you will go for but aren't necessarily either what you might say would be conducive to a good life or even what you would choose if you knew you were choosing. But of course, that also goes wider than that, because if you are flagged as a potential problem gambler, you may be flagged on other databases, which might then say, oh, well, this person essentially has a kind of mental health problem, so maybe we won't give them as big a loan, or maybe we won't show them ads for responsible jobs because maybe they're not really fit for that. So you can get flagged up for things that you're not even aware you're flagged for, that could have life-changing consequences. But I think part of the problem is built into the structure of, we won't show you everything because your life is too short and we'll decide what to show you. And as you say, you never know what you're not seeing. If you're looking for job adverts, way back when I was young, you used to look in the Guardian media adverts for media-type jobs. And that was a newspaper that came out every week, and that's where the jobs were. So if you wanted that kind of job, you looked there. Now, you go online, somebody else decides which adverts you're going to see, and you never know which ones you don't see. And you can't just go, well, hang on, nobody's showing me tech ads. This must be because they have me flagged as a woman, although, as we've seen, it's not necessarily true in my case. So I'm going to go and look for them somewhere else. But how can you do that if you don't know what you're not seeing?
Final question from me before I bring in the audience. We do have some digital humanities specialists here tonight as well. But, okay, so what is our fault? And there are some people in this room who are not on social media. I'm one of the people who am on social media, and I recognise there are times you post things or say things because you want to show where you are in a debate or what your identity is, or a whole range of things which are partly about vanity and partly that drive of getting likes and reposts and all the rest of it. So that really is our fault, isn't it? I mean, we are capable of saying, actually, you know what, I'm not going to give my view tonight on whatever subject is obsessing Westminster.
Well, yes. Yes and no. Can I say that? I think in one way it's really important to say, yes, it's our fault, and yes, actually you have agency, and you can actually just put the phone away and leave it at home and turn it off and decide that you're not going to post on this particular thing and exercise some self-control, which is just part of being an adult. But in another way, I don't want to go down the path of saying, well, it's our fault because we're all really weak and wicked and terrible people and we should just know better, because I think we have to recognise that it's a much bigger cultural thing. I think the fact that this is how we relate to each other now, and the fact that, in fact, the way we think of ourselves in the world is really tied to identity, in the sense that it's both the kind of inner kernel of who you are, but it's also a sign of where you belong and who you belong with. And I think that's never been as culturally important as it is now in Western societies. And so I also I don't want to point the finger and go, look, we're all terrible people, because this is the society that we live in now. But on the other hand, we can, we don't have to just go, well, there you go, this is how it is. And we shouldn't, and we should push back both individually and thinking in terms of, is this a society that we want to have, that we want to live in?
Okay, questions, please. And Tissat and the famous throwing microphone will come into effect. Yes, back the green and blue striped former Selwyn choir member. So,
Can you grab it? So I'll just speak into this. Okay. Yes, thank you very much for your talk. I found it really interesting. I just wanted to talk about, or ask a question about, the idea of agency that you just touched upon. And when earlier you said that the idea of addiction might be a misleading word. I've been sort of reading or noticing more the discourse around social media being linked to some sort of physiological dependency, where young adults, I think especially in the younger generations who have been brought up on phones or social media, it doesn't become a choice anymore of recuperating subjectivity or anything like that. Because people's screen times are sort of 18 hours a day. I think the exercise of self-control becomes not so much a choice, but an active kind of needing to break out of some sort of cycle. So I think it becomes, it seems to me that there is an element of addiction and dopamine reception and all that kind of thing that's connected with likes and posts. So I wonder how that plays into the argument, because the current generations that are brought up on technology in such a dependent way are going to become the voters and engage with this data and political scene. So,
Well, I think, so, I mean, one thing I would like to say, if I can plug somebody else's book, there's a very good book by a researcher who specifically looks at screen time, Professor Pete Etchells at Bath University, and it's just coming out about now. It's called Unlocked. And that is really specifically looking at the research into screen time and young people in particular. And I suppose, I mean, it's a very long and nuanced book, and I don't want to do it misjustice, but he essentially says you need to look not just at screen time, but at who is using something and what for and when. And I think that's really useful, because if you take somebody's phone away and say, no, you can't use it for 12 hours or something, and they feel something like a physical pain, it's not necessarily because there's a kind of physical addiction to the object. It's that the kind of interactions, the kind of things you can do on the phone are very important to them emotionally. And some of those things I do think are the unhealthy thing of, oh, I just want to pick this up and get a quick, oh, good, somebody's retweeted my tweet. They say I'm so old, I still call it Twitter. Somebody's liked my picture on Instagram. Oh, good, okay, I feel slightly more that I'm recognised by the world now, but obviously not very much more, so I will have to keep going back. But some of it is healthy. Some of it is that we like it because we like being in contact with other humans. And if you said to that same person, okay, we're going to lock you in a room for 12 hours and you can't talk to anybody, they would also feel that kind of almost physical, psychological pain. So this is why I think it's very important to try and consciously use technology and not just habitually pick it up for lack of anything else. I'm on a minor campaign. This is not in the book. I'm on a minor campaign to bring back boredom. And I've set myself, one of my New Year's resolutions is to be bored every week, because I think that's often where the interesting stuff happens. But you never have to be bored if you've got a phone, because you can always look at it and there's always something. It's probably not anything actually that interesting or worthwhile, but so I think addiction is the wrong word, because you could say of anything that we enjoy or find important that you get the dopamine from it. But I do think it can encourage a kind of passivity which is unhealthy. Yeah.
Okay, the lady in the black top there, just a little way ahead. Middle of the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, this discriminates against people like me that can neither throw nor catch.
Basketball, that's all. Hi. Professor of Arts, Creativities and Educations here in the University of Cambridge. Really enjoyed your talk and your provocation, and I will be reading your book. But I wondered, in your book, are you reducing the argument to a binary? You know, in that statement, we don't have a shrinking sense of who we are because of personalising technology, and I'd like you to define that, because some of us talk about social technology, some of us talk about, write about artificial creativities and the partnership, the sort of what is often described as distributive agencies that happen in partnership with technology, non-human, more than human practices. So are you reducing this argument to a binary, othering technology in this way?
I'm oppressing technology. I don't think so. I mean, I decided writing the book that I was going to take the position that we should not blame the technology, that we need to think about what we are doing with it. And that's partly because there are a lot of very good books out there already spelling out how the technology works and how it takes away some of our agency and a lot of other things, and and privacy, as Roger was saying. So there is some of that in the book, and some are saying this is how it works and you probably should worry about this more. But I just felt it was very important to bring back the sense of agency, as the former chorister was saying, that actually it's not in control of us and we can control it. In terms of othering the technology, I don't actually think the technology is bad. I think it's very much something that we can use for our purposes, and that's why I think I come back to this. Well, why are we using it? If we're only using it to try and shore up our fragile sense of who we are, then that's the problem. But it's not a problem we're going to solve by taking technology away, because we would still have this fragile sense of who we are, and then we'd have to go and find something else. So I absolutely don't think it's that. Personalising technology, the book is not only about social media, the book is really about the idea of personalisation, of which technology is only a part, but it's a really important part because it's so good at it. Because we have technology which is so good at gathering thousands of data points on each of us, building a profile, targeting things at the profile, testing the things to see if the profile responds in the predicted way. Oh, it doesn't, okay, we'll tweak them, we'll make it slightly different. But really, I became interested in the cultural meaning of the personalisation that's happening and what it's responding to in us psychologically. And then I stepped back culturally and went, okay, but we haven't always felt this way, that we want everything. We haven't always felt that it's so important that the universe reflects us back to ourselves. So where did that come from? So I'm afraid I kind of start with smart speakers and go back to the 4th century AD and Bishop Gregory of Nyssa. Rather to my editor's shock, I have to say. She wasn't expecting quite so much social history.
Okay, if we can come 2 rows down to, I will identify Professor Claire Warwick, who is a digital humanities specialist at Durham and also a Selwyn alumnus. So,
hello, yes. Thank you very much. Yes, really fascinating talk. There are so many things I'd like to ask, but I have to pick one. I wondered whether you often said we all do social media, we all spend this time on our phones, but some people don't. And I actually have students, talking to one of my students the other day where she was saying she and many of her friends are consciously taking themselves off things like Instagram because they're aware of the damage it could be doing to them. So, and some people just don't really enjoy social media and don't really get it. So I'm wondering, is there anything to be learned? Talking about the sort of narcissistic culture that's prevalent. If we're trying to change that, is there anything to be learned from social media refuseniks or people that just don't really do this kind of thing?
I'm sure there is, yeah. And I think there is some really interesting work to be done there, yeah, definitely. I am aware that I wildly generalise. When I say we, I obviously mean like everybody in Western societies as if we're all the same, and clearly we're not. And I also wildly generalise about phases of history. When I split history into the mass century and the personalised century, which would give conniptions to any actual historians in the room, I'm sure. So I'm going very broad brush and then trying to introduce some nuance. But I'm very aware that I'm just starting a conversation, and I'm hoping that a lot of people will come back to me and go, okay, well, that was an interesting point, but you're very wrong about this, and this is why. Because I am actually of the view that you can definitely improve your views and your sense of the world through argument.
And would you say it's true that, even if you're not on Twitter or X, you are affected by X? Because it's very hard now to see any political stories and not see the X-Twitter effect in it.
Well, I think that's true. And also, I am dismayed, frankly, by the way mainstream media is often led by social media. So things which started off as a relatively small spat on X, or mainly X actually, then become news stories. And much as I personally spend far too much time on X, sometimes getting involved in the spats, I do often think, is this news though, really? Just because like maybe 1,000 people who spend too much time on social media think this is an issue. Like, I'm sure most people out there really don't care. I think it does shape the world probably more than it should. But I think you're possibly more the expert in that side of it than I am, Roger.
Doubt that. Leo.
You wanted someone to talk about misinformation, so we'll go. I think it's pretty clear that social media sort of facilitates the ability for misinformation to get around. And I was wondering where your thought process comes in with, do we control misinformation when, you can have AI bots programming and seeing what kind of person they should target, but also it can come from anyone generally at all. So where does your argument fit into that?
Well, I think so. I think a couple of things. One of them is that it's partly just the downside of, if you like, the democratization of media, that we don't have a handful of experienced editors and journalists going, let's check the facts on this before we put it out there. Anybody can spread anything, and that has good effects as well. And it does mean that things that aren't being adequately covered or that mainstream media haven't picked up enough on, for whatever reason, can emerge in other ways. But it does mean you don't get the kind of journalistic rigour that would winnow out misleading things. But in another way, I think it's a real challenge because there's nothing clear that one can do about it. There are countries that have passed laws against misinformation, and they are almost always very authoritarian countries with almost no free speech. So that's usually a bad sign. And it's not really clear that there is any way that you could actually suppress it except by encouraging people to be more critical and more questioning. And interestingly, somebody who does a lot of really good work on this, somebody called Carl Miller, who does a lot of research at Demos, who probably more than anybody else I would go to tell me about misinformation, disinformation. Last time I saw him last year, he said, I've stopped using those words because they're really unhelpful, because a lot of the time when things get shared widely in a misleading way, they're often true. The thing itself is true, it's just it's shared in a way that is designed to have an impact on a wide audience and a particular audience, and that's the problem. And then it becomes even less clear what you could do about it, because what you could have a government ministry of narratives that approves how things are going to be told. I mean, there's like, who are we going to trust to tell us what we should see and read? But I think that the thing that we almost need to address, I think, is that sense of we need to be critical of things, and the thing that I'm sure all of us fall into, at least I hope so, because I do, is the too good to check. When you get a story or an example that is the perfect example of the point that you're trying to make, or perfectly sums up your worldview, and then you share it, and then you discover that it wasn't quite like that, or it was bogus, or the paper didn't really show that, or whatever. And that's a really difficult thing to battle. But I think that's the only thing really that's going to save us from that, is if people just become a bit more critical and a bit more, this fits my story so well. But then, of course, again, that brings us back to, are you genuinely wanting to only share the truth, or actually are you more interested in waving the flag for whatever cause you're on, in which case you're maybe not going to care whether it was true or says the thing you say it was says.
Okay, we have time for 2-3 more questions. The lady in the white and green top. Good, sorry.
Thank you. I'd like to just push something that you're saying that I feel isn't too clear, Timandra. So, in your conclusion, you were talking about rescuing the person and who we are, and it almost started to sound therapeutic or moral. I sort of oppose people feeling that social media or personalisation is something that can be addictive, because it reduces agency. So what is it that you're trying to push at? Because you can almost sound therapeutic, that we're trying to sort ourselves out. We need to understand ourselves. What is it that you're tending towards? Are you talking about morality and politics and ideas and freedom? What is it that you're saying is problematic, particularly about personalisation as well?
Well, I suppose the problem for me is that the thing that's missing from a personalised world is the person, in the sense of a person having agency and being a subject in the world instead of a rat in a Skinner box responding to stimuli. And so inevitably, yeah, it is going to sound a bit therapeutic or self-helpy despite my best efforts, because there is an extent to which only an individual can do that. Only an individual can say, no, I have agency and I'm going to be responsible for what I do in the world and make things happen in the world and not just respond to things and not only choose off whatever menu my mobile phone gives me, but go, yeah, but what do I actually want to be doing? What do I actually want to do with my life that's not going to be offered me on a menu? But of course, the flip side of that is you can't actually do that much in the world on your own. That if you want to actually be oriented outwards to the world and make a difference to the world rather than just oriented inward to yourself and shape who you are or who you are in the eyes of others, then quite rapidly you're going to have to work with other people and find other people who also want to make a difference to the world and deal with them and persuade them to do the same things that you want to do, or maybe deal with them and find that actually their ideas are better than yours. So I think very rapidly it can't be an individual project, but you do need the individual to say, no, I'm actually going to take responsibility for my own life and the direction of my own life and not just constantly respond to what I'm being offered on a personalised menu.
And I think we'll go to the final question to the gentleman next to you.
Yeah, I was been thinking of a few things, and I always go back to the war, because that's what we do in the UK. So after the war, that period, try and get this as quick as I can, people were very concentrated, they'd had agency, they'd fought a war, big thing, everyone was socially connected together, they knew what needed doing. After the war, it was very difficult, and I might be missing the point here, to be narcissistic. You had things to do, things to get on. Whereas jumping forward now, it feels much more like people have the time, the space, or whatever's going on, to be more under the effect of fate. Whether it's global warming or whatever, it's things are almost decided for you in a way, or there's just more things to worry about. So I just wondered, and I also connected it to, because you talk about personal agency, but there's also societal agency, I guess, and I'm not suggesting we have a war or something like that, but I guess I don't know, I'm not quite clear if you mean that as well as just personal agency, and what could recapture a sort of wider societal agency, if I've not gone too far off the subject, I guess.
Well, the short answer is that if I knew that, I wouldn't be writing books, I'd be standing for Parliament. But no, that is absolutely the question. But I think the two things are connected, because I think there is a lack of societal agency, and you can see it in quite trivial things. When somebody was saying recently, we're about to fight a war soon, I'm like, well, I hope not, because at the moment we can't run a train service or a postal service in this country. So heaven help us if we actually had to fight a war. We can't even keep the basic things going that the Victorians built for us. So, I think but that's the thing. I think when individuals lack agency and don't take responsibility for themselves, then that very rapidly has a social effect, because if nobody takes responsibility, then nothing gets done and things fall apart. And I think, without being too downbeat, but I think we are seeing elements of that, and that's why the two things are connected. But I also think, to go back to Lash's thing about the rugged individual to today's vulnerable narcissist who needs constant reassurance. But Lash actually talked about having lost two things. He said, well, and he was talking particularly about America, although I think now a lot of this is equally true here. He said, we had the rugged individualist who was supposedly going out the frontier, making their own world, shaping nature and so on. But they also had a sense of community backing each other up, that you could rely on each other. And he said the problem is we've lost both of those things. So we don't have rugged individualists, and we also don't have a strong community. And that's why people are unrooted and lost and constantly looking for communities to belong to, but always knowing somehow that there's something arbitrary, because they've chosen this group, but they could have chosen that group. And so they never quite feel at home, and they never quite feel that other people have their back in that way. And so, we can't go backwards, which is why I think it's a genuinely challenging time. But we do need both those things. We need to be more, if you like, rugged, but we also need to have a much stronger sense of community. And COVID, I thought, was really interesting that in many ways it was depressing, because the fabric of society was disregarded and shredded, and I think we're still seeing the after effects of that. But you did also see people really come out and help each other, and this great wave of volunteering. It started, instead of everyone going, I'm frightened, I'm going to stay home, millions of people went, right, I'm going to volunteer to help. Come on, give me something to do. And the government went, I don't know, we'll put you on a list. We'll get back to you. So I think the potential's there. And if I knew how to get there, I'd be standing for Parliament. So it's going to take all of you and you on the internet, all of you on the internet, every single person on the internet. It's going to take all of us, all right?
I have some commercials. First from you, when is the book out?
The book is out on May the 23rd.
And
it's published by Harper Collins. It's called Technology is Not the Problem.
Okay. The next major event in here will be the V.S. Naipaul lecture with Pankaj Mishra, which is going to be on the 12th of March. I'd also, if you do want to find out more about Living Freedom, livingfreedom.org.uk is where they are, so you can go online or look on Twitter or X for Living Freedom. And the other thing is our lovely development team would, if you're not from Selwyn and you'd like to sign up for the Selwyn mailing events list, there are those forms out in reception as you go out. And do please sign up, because we love you coming to these events. So all I can do now, Timandra, is thank you hugely for a very stimulating and interesting talk. We're delighted to have had you here.
Well, thank you
to
for
Living
having
Freedom.
me.
And,
It's been really
thank
nice.
you very much for coming. Thank you very much. Okay, we can talk now. He's turned the microphones off, so that's good.